She leaned closer, her voice trembling just enough to shake me. "I'm just your mom's friend. Does that scare you?" In that moment, I knew nothing would ever feel simple again. I still remember the first evening she was there. Not just there, like someone in the background, but there in a way that shifted the air the second I walked into the house. My mom's voice floated from the kitchen, joined by laughter that didn't belong to her. A lighter, richer kind of laughter. When I stepped into the living room, I saw her sitting at the dining table. My mom's friend. She was in her early 40s, though that number barely meant anything once you actually looked at her. There was something about the way she carried herself, as if time had given her a kind of grace that couldn't be rushed. Her dark hair was pinned back loosely, a few strands framing her face, and she wore the kind of smile that felt effortless. Not polite, not forced, effortless. I told myself it was just respect, that natural instinct to notice someone older, someone confident. But the truth is, when she lifted her eyes to greet me, it felt like the room shifted. "Your mom's been spoiling me with tea," she said with a grin, her bracelets clinking softly as she lifted her cup. It was such a small sound, but I noticed it, the way people notice raindrops on quiet nights. I nodded, tried to answer casually, but my chest felt tight for reasons I couldn't explain. She wasn't just my mom's friend in that moment. She was a presence, warm, composed, magnetic in a way that didn't demand attention but naturally drew it. As I sat across from her, I found myself picking up details I had no business memorizing. The way she leaned forward when she laughed, resting her elbow on the table, her fingertips brushing her cheek, the faint scent of her perfume. Something subtle, nothing loud or floral, just soft, like it belonged only to her. I tried to distract myself by joining in their conversation. They spoke about neighbors, plans for the weekend, small stories that should have floated past me. But I kept catching the curve of her smile when she listened, the way her eyes seemed to hold things she didn't always say. And every time she glanced at me, just a glance, it felt like I had to remind myself to breathe normally again. That night, I lay in bed thinking about it more than I should have. How she carried herself, how natural she seemed sitting there with my mom, and yet how strangely out of place she felt in my mind. I told myself it was nothing, just noticing, just being polite. But somewhere deep down, I knew better. That wasn't just noticing. It was the beginning of noticing. The kitchen was small enough that two people working inside felt like a dance. I hadn't planned on joining her there. I was just grabbing a glass of water before heading upstairs. But when I saw her rinsing dishes at the sink, sleeves rolled just above her elbows, I hesitated. Something in me didn't want to leave so quickly. "Here, let me help," I said, stepping closer. She turned, smiling over her shoulder. "You don't have to. I've got it." "Still," I answered, already reaching for a towel. "Feels wrong to let a guest do all the work." Guest. That word sounded too thin for her. She didn't feel like a guest. She felt like she belonged, though not in any way I could explain out loud. I stood beside her, drying each dish she passed me. At first it was nothing, just the sound of running water, plates clinking lightly, the rustle of a towel in my hands. But then her hand brushed mine when she passed me a glass. Just a small, accidental touch. Warm, quick, but I felt it too much for something so small. She didn't pull away in a hurry, though. Her fingers lingered for half a second longer than necessary before she let go. And when I glanced up, she was smiling faintly, as if amused by something she wasn't saying. "You've grown up," she said, her tone playful but softer than a joke. The words caught me off guard. My chest tightened, though I tried to play it off with a shrug. "Yeah, well, that tends to happen." She laughed quietly, shaking her head. "No, I mean really. Last time I saw you, you were still in college. Now you look different. Older." I didn't know how to answer that, so I just smiled, focusing too hard on the plate in my hands. But inside, my thoughts were restless. Was it just a casual observation? Or was there something in her tone? Something noticing me in the same way I had noticed her earlier? The silence between us grew heavier than the sound of the faucet. I caught the faint scent of her perfume again, carried in the air every time she leaned close to place another dish beside me. It was delicate, clean, almost distracting in the way it lingered. She reached for a bowl at the same moment I did. Our hands collided, flat against the cool porcelain. For a moment neither of us moved. Her hand, smaller than mine, rested against my skin as naturally as if it belonged there. Her eyes lifted, meeting mine. Neither of us spoke. Then she gently let go of the bowl, pulling her hand back with the kind of quiet grace only she could have. She didn't apologize. She didn't laugh it off. She simply returned to rinsing dishes, but the faintest smile curved at her lips, as if the silence between us had said enough. And maybe it had. The house had grown quiet. My mom had gone upstairs, leaving only the faint sound of her footsteps fading into the floorboards above. I lingered in the living room longer than I needed to, flipping through my phone without really looking at it. Listening. That's when I noticed the sliding door to the balcony cracked open, the night air slipping inside. She was out there. I stepped closer, pausing in the doorway. She sat on the balcony chair, one leg crossed over the other, a half-empty glass of wine resting in her hand. The porch light above her wasn't harsh, but soft, golden. It traced her profile in gentle lines, making her look more delicate than I'd ever seen. For a moment I just watched. She wasn't smiling now. She wasn't performing the easy charm she carried earlier. Instead, she looked thoughtful, almost heavy, like she was carrying something no one else could see. I knocked lightly on the frame before stepping outside. "Mind if I join you?" She glanced up, startled at first, then softened. "Of course not. I could use the company." I sat in the chair beside her. The night air was cool, the kind that carries hints of grass and faraway traffic. She swirled the wine in her glass slowly, watching it with the kind of focus people have when they're really thinking about something else entirely. "You're quieter now," I said gently. Her lips curved into a small, tired smile. "That's because your mom isn't here to keep the conversation going." I chuckled, but she didn't laugh. Instead, she let out a breath that seemed to release more than just air. "Truth is," she began, her voice quieter now, "sometimes I get tired of always being the friend who looks like she has it all figured out." I turned toward her, surprised. She didn't look at me, just at the wine glass catching the porch light. "Everyone assumes I'm fine," she continued, "that I've got this perfect balance, this stability. And most days I play along. But nights like this, I realize how much I hide." Her words lingered in the air, heavy but fragile, like they might break if touched. I didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, I let it rest between us, then asked softly, "And what is it you hide?" She finally looked at me then. Her eyes, so steady earlier, now seemed unguarded, vulnerable in a way that made my chest ache. "That I get lonely," she admitted. "More than I ever let on." The honesty of it sat with me. She wasn't just my mom's friend anymore. She was a person, strong, yes, but not unshakable. And in her quiet confession, I felt a kind of closeness I hadn't expected. Without thinking, I shifted my hand on the armrest, close enough that she could rest hers there if she wanted. She didn't take it, but she didn't pull away either. She just breathed a little easier, as if being heard was enough. And maybe, for now, it was. Later that night, after the dishes were done and the balcony conversation had faded into something quieter, the house seemed to exhale. My mom had already gone to bed, leaving only the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock above the mantel. I found myself on the couch, half watching a muted show on the TV. She drifted in from the kitchen, holding a cup of tea, and without asking, lowered herself onto the cushion beside me. Not too close, not far either. Just enough that her presence pressed gently against my awareness. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She sipped her tea, eyes on the screen, though I doubted she was paying attention. I wasn't either. I noticed her knee brushing mine, lightly, as if by accident. But she didn't move it away. I felt the warmth of her body, the subtle weight of her presence beside me, and every nerve seemed to tune itself to that one point of contact. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, but her hand lingered near her cheek, fingers tracing lightly before falling back to her lap. I found myself staring longer than I should have, then forced my eyes back to the screen. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was alive, carrying all the unspoken things neither of us dared to say. "You're quiet tonight," she murmured finally, her voice low enough that it didn't need to rise above the television. I glanced at her. "So are you." That earned me a small smile, soft and unreadable. She shifted slightly, turning her body toward me more fully. The movement brought her shoulder just close enough that I could feel the brush of her sleeve against mine. I swallowed, trying to mask the way my pulse quickened. "You always sit this close to people when you watch TV?" Her eyes flickered to mine, amused. "Only when I feel comfortable." Comfortable. The word shouldn't have carried the weight it did, but it sank into me like a secret. Her hand rested on the couch between us, palm open, fingers loose. I wondered if it was intentional, if she left it there for me to notice. My own hand twitched, wanting to close the space, but I stayed still. The air was already charged enough. Minutes passed in that silence. Her tea cooled on the table, the show played on without an audience. All that mattered was the quiet awareness, the nearness, the way her presence seemed to fill every corner of me. And though no words were spoken, I knew this was the moment when everything shifted. When she wasn't just my mom's friend, or a guest, or a passing figure in my life. She was a woman sitting beside me, close enough to touch, close enough to want. And wanting her was the one thing I couldn't admit. Not yet. The night stretched longer than it should have. The TV flickered in the background, a silent blur neither of us cared about anymore. What mattered was the distance, or lack of it, between us. Her shoulder leaned lightly against mine now, as if the weight of the day had tipped her closer without either of us realizing it. The heat of her body seeped through the thin space that separated us, until even breathing felt like a decision. I didn't dare move. One wrong shift, and it might break whatever fragile thread was holding this moment together. She set her empty teacup on the table, then leaned back into the couch. Her movements were slow, deliberate, but not rehearsed. Natural. Her arm brushed mine again, and this time, she didn't shift away. "Do you ever feel," she began softly, almost to herself, "like life keeps putting you in places you're not supposed to be, but you stay anyway?" The words hung between us, layered and heavy. I didn't know if she was talking about herself, or if she meant this. Sitting here beside me, too close, too late at night. "I think," I said carefully, "sometimes the places we're not supposed to be are the ones that feel the most right." Her eyes lifted to mine then, steady and searching. For a second, it felt like she was trying to read something written across my face. The room was too quiet. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint tick of the clock, they only made the silence between us louder. And then she leaned closer, just enough that her hair brushed against my cheek, her breath warm against my ear. Her whisper came slow, almost trembling, though her voice carried an edge of daring. "I'm just your mom's friend. Does that scare you?" I froze. My heart kicked hard in my chest, each beat louder than the next. Scare me? It should have. The truth was, yes, it did. Not because of who she was, but because of what it meant. Because once the line was crossed, nothing about my life or hers would ever return to normal. I turned slightly, close enough that I could see the tiny flecks of gold in her eyes, the faint curve of her lips as she waited for my answer. She wasn't teasing. She wasn't testing me. She was bearing something fragile, risky, real. I wanted to tell her no, that I wasn't scared at all, that the only thing frightening was how badly I wanted her in that moment. But the words stuck in my throat, lodged behind the racing pulse of my hesitation. Instead, I held her gaze, letting my silence speak. Her lips parted, just slightly, as if she almost regretted asking. Then, with a quiet breath, she leaned back an inch, but not away. Her hand found the couch cushion between us again, fingers brushing the back of mine. And in that tiny touch, everything she had whispered was still alive. We hadn't crossed the line. Not yet. But we were standing on the very edge of it, trembling. The silence after her whisper stretched on, fragile but unbroken. My pulse still hadn't slowed, and I could tell from the way she exhaled, slow, uneven, that hers hadn't either. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. She sat with her hands folded loosely in her lap, gaze lowered, as though the question she'd asked had startled her as much as it had me. Finally, I said softly, "Yes, it scares me." Her head lifted, eyes flickering to mine. There was a shadow of disappointment there, like she had expected me to say something braver. But I didn't let the pause last. "It scares me because it matters," I continued. "Because it's not just some passing thing I can ignore. You're more than that to me already." Her lips parted slightly, as though she wanted to protest, but no words came out. She looked away, toward the darkened TV, chewing lightly at her bottom lip. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I can't be reckless about this. People look at me differently. Your mom, she trusts me. I'm supposed to know better." Her voice trembled near the end, and hearing it cut through me. This wasn't just hesitation. It was fear, real fear of being judged, of crossing a line she couldn't uncross. I shifted closer, not touching her yet, but letting the weight of my presence steady the space between us. "I don't care what anyone else thinks," I said. "I care what you think. I care what you feel when you're here with me." She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them, meeting mine. There it was, that unguarded vulnerability I had glimpsed on the balcony. Strong on the outside, yes, but inside she was carrying more than anyone else realized. "And what if I feel too much?" she asked quietly. "What if wanting this only ruins things?" The confession lodged itself in my chest. She did feel something. I wasn't imagining it. I reached across the couch, slow enough to give her time to pull away. When my hand finally covered hers, I felt the faint tremor running through her fingers. She didn't move. She just looked at me, wide-eyed, caught between resistance and surrender. "What scares me," I admitted, "is not knowing you. Not really. Not finding out what this could mean. That's the only thing I'm afraid of losing." Her hand tightened around mine then, just slightly. Enough to let me know she had heard me, believed me. Tears didn't fall, but her eyes shone faintly in the glow of the lamp. She drew a deep breath, steadied herself, and whispered, "You have no idea how long it's been since someone said that to me." The honesty of her words broke something open in the space between us. For the first time, it wasn't just tension holding us together. It was truth, and truth, as terrifying as it was, felt like the only safe place we had left. The air between us felt changed after that confession. She hadn't pulled her hand away from mine. She hadn't hidden behind a polite smile or shifted the subject like before. Instead, she let the silence linger. This time softer, lighter, as though it no longer needed to be filled with words. I could feel the warmth of her palm against mine. Her fingers curled just enough to remind me she wasn't letting go. "Not yet. I don't know what comes after this," she whispered finally, her voice quiet but steady. "I can't promise you anything. I don't even know if I should." Her honesty hit me harder than anything else she'd said that night. She wasn't teasing. She wasn't hiding. She was simply laying the truth bare, and it made her feel more real, more human than ever. I shifted closer, turning toward her fully now. My free hand moved almost on its own, lifting gently until it cupped her cheek. Her skin was warm, softer than I imagined, and the way she leaned ever so slightly into my touch told me she needed it more than she'd admit. "You don't have to promise me forever," I said. "Just promise me this moment, that it's real." Her breath trembled as she let it out, and then she covered my hand with hers, holding it against her cheek as if she didn't want it to slip away. "This moment," she whispered back, "is real." That was all it took. The tension, the hesitation, the fear. They didn't vanish, but they quieted. We leaned into each other slowly, carefully, as if both of us were afraid of moving too quickly and shattering what had formed between us. When her forehead rested against mine, the world outside the room fell away. No neighbors, no rules, no questions of what tomorrow might demand. Just her breathing close to me, the faint scent of her hair, the steady anchor of her presence. We stayed like that for a long time, eyes closed, holding on to something neither of us wanted to name out loud. Not yet. Eventually, her arms slid around me, pulling me into a full embrace. It wasn't rushed, wasn't desperate. It was slow and certain, the kind of hug that said more than any words could manage. I held her tightly, feeling the curve of her back, the strength and softness interwoven in the woman who had just entrusted me with a piece of her truth. When she finally pulled back, she kept her hands on my face, steadying me with her gaze. "Whatever this is," she said, voice low, "we'll figure it out, or maybe we won't. But tonight, I just want to let myself feel it." I nodded, unable to speak, because anything I said would have felt too small. So instead, I kissed her cheek, slow, lingering, reverent. And in that tender silence, we chose not a future, but a beginning. Together, but uncertain. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more slow burn romances. Share it with someone who loves heartfelt storytelling. And let me know in the comments what part touched you most.